Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today. Before we begin, I just want to say on behalf of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, we want to extend our sincere condolences to the families of the players, coaches, and staff members of the Yaroslavl hockey team of the KHL in Russia who died today in a tragic plane crash. The thoughts and prayers of the Penguins, the NHL family, and the entire hockey world are with you during this difficult time.
Okay, before we open it to your questions, we're going to have two opening statements from the doctors who have treated Sid. Dr. Michael Collins is director of the UPMC Sports Medicine Concussion Program. Dr. Ted Carrick is director of the Carrick Institute in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and distinguished professor of neurology at Life University in Marietta, Georgia. And then we'll take your questions. Dr. Collins?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mickey Collins. I wanted to take some time in opening this and actually describing what a concussion is and how we've treated Sid and where Sid's gone with this injury. A concussion is a brain injury. The word concussus literally translates from Latin to English to mean to shake violently. Think about your brain as an egg yolk inside an eggshell, and there's rotational or acceleration forces that cause the brain to move inside the skull. When that occurs in our brain, we have billions of cells called neurons, and when the brain moves inside the skull, the neurons will stretch, and there's certain chemicals that come out of the neuron that shouldn't come out, and there's certain chemicals that go into the neuron that shouldn't go in. And when that occurs, at the end of the day, what a concussion is an energy problem within the brain. The brain is starved for energy, and it's not getting enough supply of energy. We know that brain injury can cause significant symptoms and significant issues. I first saw Sid on January 6th. At the time I became involved in Sid's care. And when I saw Sid, he was having very consistent symptoms consistent with a significant cerebral concussion. He was foggy. And what that means is that it's almost like your high definition TV is like a standard definition TV. It feels like you're one step behind yourself. It feels like you're in slow motion. He had headaches. He had fogginess. He had difficulties with fatigue. He had light sensitivity, noise sensitivity. He had a hard time thinking. At that point, I evaluated him with a tool called IMPACT, which is a neurocognitive test, and his testing was significant for significant problems with his cognitive functioning. His findings were entirely consistent with what we see with concussion. At that point in time, when I saw Sid's profile of symptoms, when I saw the deficits and impact, I knew that we were in for a long recovery. The types of symptoms Sid had initially are exactly the type of symptoms that we see that end up taking the longest to recover from concussion. The symptom of fogginess, although it's very hard to describe and hard to articulate and very hard to pinpoint and really hard to experience, is the symptom that best predicts someone who's going to have a long-term recovery. So at that point, the first time I saw Sid, I knew we were in for the long run with this injury, and quite frankly, I wasn't, nor am I now, surprised that it's taken this long for Sid to start improving. And yes, we are seeing significant improvements recently. When I saw Sid, we underwent a rehabilitation program where we introduced physical therapy to help with the types of symptoms that Sid had, I should say. The type of concussion Sid had is, and it's a little complex, but it's something we call a vestibular type of concussion. The vestibular system in the brain, the job of that system is to integrate sensory information. So when you have to keep your head still and move your eyes, or keep your eyes still and move your head, when you're in a busy environment, when you're skating down the ice and the boards are moving by, or you're moving by the boards that are quicker to speed, when you have to look down, look up, do turns, that space and motion system is exactly the system that was affected in Sid's injury. Sid is a Ferrari. His vestibular system is better than anyone else's. That's why he is the most elite hockey player in the world. That system is where Sid excels at. That system is why Sid is who he is. It makes sense that where his injury was, it's going to take a while to rehabilitate this. And we've done a very good job of doing that. I don't look at concussion as the boogeyman here. I think this is a manageable injury, and we're making progress in Sid's case, and I anticipate Sid returning to hockey and playing well in the future. But I can guarantee you that we're not going to make any mistakes in this case. And before Sid goes back to play, we're going to make sure he's 100% recovered, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Fortunately, we have very good ways of assessing that. We understand what to look at, what systems to measure and assess, what symptoms to ask about. We understand the influence of his exertion on those symptoms, and we understand what we have to achieve before we can put Sid back in harm's way, and where he's going to take another hit. And when he does, we want to make sure that this is fully resolved. I can tell you that over the course of the summer, we initially rehabilitated Sid to the point where he became more active, started to skate, was doing well. We got to that 80 to 90% level of exertion, and as he increased his speed playing hockey, as he increased his turns, as he increased his motion, the symptoms started coming back again. At that point, and even with all the rehab we had done, Dr. Carrick became involved. And Dr. Carrick is an expert in rehabbing these types of injuries and these types of symptoms. And Sid saw Dr. Carrick, and recently Sid has made exceptional progress towards improving and to becoming normal. At this point in time, yesterday actually, I assessed Sid. I haven't assessed him for a while. I was able to assess him and do the testing that we do, and I can tell you that his data is the best we've seen. It is approaching normal limits. It is not there yet. It's something that I was extremely encouraged by with the numbers that I saw in Impact. I'm very pleased with where he's at right now from an activity standpoint. Right now, I would classify Sid's case as we're in reconditioning mode. In order for Sid to go back to play, he needs to be reconditioned 100% without having symptoms. So let's get him reconditioned and see how he does. At that point, if he can recondition and his symptoms are not there, we will then have a systematic process regarding return to play. There's no timelines on this. We cannot predict when that's going to occur. But like I said earlier, I can guarantee you one thing, and that's we're going to make sure this is 100% normal before he goes back to play. Thank you.
Dr. Carrick?
Good day, people. I'm here because Sid asked me to be here to discuss with you some of the things that have been going on in his life over the last while, and I know you haven't been kept up to date with a lot of the components. More recently, Sid was referred to me because of his continuing symptoms, fogginess, dizziness, lightheadedness, inability to do things to his maximum function. We were able to see him at my lab at Life University in Marietta, Georgia, and we're able to follow up and work with Dr. Collins and his team. And we had a different type of approach where we looked at the physicality, and we did specific measurements that allowed us to really make a very good diagnostic impression of what was happening in Sid's brain. Now, you all know that your brain allows you to think and to write and to read, to look at paintings or to perhaps paint them. But one thing that the brain does is it really allows you to know where you are in space and where space is in reference to you. In Sid's case, that was not exactly correct. That is to say, areas of space were not in an appropriate grid to where he would perceive them. It's as if you can imagine something to be in your right, but it's a little bit off of right. And we have different types of reflexes. You all have probably had a fall or a slip, and you know if you fall to the right side, you're going to lift your arms out or something to catch yourself from falling. Well, you can imagine if your brain has been injured and that you perceive that you're falling and you're not falling, then you can have different reactions of different muscles and different stability factors that make it difficult for you to do certain things. We were able in our lab to quantify this, get some numbers, get some data, and then to develop strategies that allowed us to basically build him a new grid. We can change the representation of body parts and environment in the brain. We can do that very, very successfully with different types of strategies, and Sid did very, very well. So at the present time, he is able now to embrace strategies with a new system where everything is in line. That is to say, where his right hand is perceived is where his right hand is. Where his right leg is perceived to be is where his right leg is. He's markedly stable. The function that we have between the head, the eyes, the neck, his spine is really absolutely marvelous. The problem that we have in Sid's case and in cases of other people is that the length of time that he's had the aberrancy, if you would, or the disconnection of what his function was, has led him into different patterns that now we have to break. Things are working well now, and he's got to condition himself with these new patterns. when we first saw Sid, different functions didn't work well at all. Now they do work well, and he's got to get used to them. There's some other strategies and adjustments to his system that we need to do over the next little while, and I'm very, very thankful. It's Christmas, I think, for Sid Crosby and for people that care for him, and it's a very good start. Our treatment of Sid was not only to allow him to return to hockey, but we're very, very concerned with the state of anybody's brain when they injure it. And our greatest direction is to ensure that Sid has a very fruitful and positive life, that he can do anything he wishes to do in hockey and after hockey to live the vibrancy and to embrace that type of activity. As a consequence, the things that we do in our lab, not only do we see people from around the world with similar difficult problems such as Sid, but we're very much involved in a vitalistic approach to wellness to prevent such injuries, such as having no tolerance for headshots in this game and in other games. If we can put our direction to preventing more injuries such as this, and then address the people that do have concussions, then we can make a very, very profound statement that not only can affect the sport of hockey and other sports, but society in general. So we've got a long course ahead of us. The incidence of head injury is epidemic. We're seeing it in young kids, we're seeing it in old kids, and everywhere in between. This case is one of the good outcomes, and some cases are not as good as this one. We're fortunate today to have technology that allows us to quantify things in ways we only dreamed of yesterday, and it's a good time to have a head injury now compared to a few years ago, but hopefully we won't have to go through these things in the future.
Any questions?
Sid, thank you for
Wait for
the
the microphone.
availability today.
Please wait for the microphone.
Thank you for the availability today. Sid, how are you mentally through this 8 months of dealing with this? And at any time over this period, did you consider retirement?
Mentally, I feel good. It's probably the best I've felt, honestly. So, really happy with the last 3 weeks, and it's been very positive. It's been a tough road. Retirement, no. I think I've always thought about the consequences of this injury and making sure I'm smart with it, because at the end of the day, that's the last thing I want. But that being said, I think, no, I didn't really give a whole lot of thought to that.
This is for anybody up there that can answer it. When you talk about return to play and clearing for contact, what is your guys' definition of contact? Have you taken any bumps at all, or is that normal hockey contact? And secondly, the Christmas line, I was a little confused by what that meant, so if you could maybe elaborate on that,
sure.
please.
The reason for Christmas, it's sort of a celebration. This is going to have a very good outcome. Sid shouldn't have any sequelae or problems in the future. What we found with our testing is that we have different perturbations. It's a large word, which means to say something's going to knock you off your center. And Sid wasn't able to tolerate small perturbations. He would fall, or so now he's able to tolerate great perturbations. So we have the numbers. When you have contact of any sort, whether it be contact with the ice or just contact walking down the road or contact with another player, that causes a different reaction. So if someone presses against you, you're going to have reactions of your body specific to where you perceive the contact coming from and actually where you are. When things are askew, then your reaction to that contact is not appropriate. That is to say, someone may push you in this direction, and rather than rotating away from that contact, you might rotate into it. So our therapy is very, very specific to allowing the refinement and development of appropriate responses now that Sid's on his way to a fuller recovery.
I can tell you that we're going to make sure we introduce contact in a very careful way, and we're not even close to that right now. We need to make sure that Sid is able to recondition fully without any return of these symptoms. We're going to measure him with impact and with our testing every step of the way, and we're going to make sure that we do this in a systematic, careful way. And when he's ready, we'll know. And I think the prognosis, I agree with Dr. Carrick, the prognosis, first of all, is excellent, that Sid will not have any long-term problems from this injury. In fact, I'm supremely confident in that issue. The return to play issue, I'm also equally positive. I think we'll get there. But we're not there yet, and we have work to do before we get there.
This is for Dr. Collins and for Sid to follow up on it. First of all, am I saying it right? Is it vestibular? Is that
Yes.
it? Vestibular? If his vestibular perception is that of a Ferrari, can he regain that 100%? And I guess, Sid, from your point of view, if your perception in that regard is so high, is it hard for you to diagnose when you're getting close to 100% because your 100% might be a little, I mean, your 90% might be somebody else's 100% based on some of the things that Dr. Collins was saying?
First of all, I don't think you could have said it more eloquently. Sid's 100% is different than anyone else's. And that has been a challenge with this case because he is the Ferrari of hockey players. And, you know, we have made tremendous progress with this. At this point, Sid is not having any classic vestibular symptoms remaining. All this fogginess, the fatigue, the dizziness, the space and motion issues at this point in time at 70–80% of reconditioning have gone away, which is very positive. It is a challenge because this is not like your usual case. And I see these injuries all day, every day, and I see high school kids that have these problems, and their 100% is maybe perhaps a little different than Sid's. And so that has been a challenge, but I think we're going to be very attuned to that as we move forward.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, I think, 90% is good, but at the same time, if there's symptoms or if there's things that aren't right, 90% really isn't good enough. I'm probably putting myself in a position to get hit and probably mess that system up a little bit more. That I don't want to do that. So maybe I could get by with 90%, maybe I couldn't, but I'm not going to roll the dice on that. I think it's important to get back to where I need to be, and if not, we've seen it many times. You'll get reoccurring issues, and I definitely want to stay away from that. So
We know that
reality is-
outcomes are, I'm sorry, Sid. We know that outcomes are much better when we achieve that 100%, so we're not going to allow Sid to go back at 90%.
Sid, and this goes for Sid and Dr. Collins. Sid, you amped it up pretty good when you tried to come back during the playoffs. You were skating around pretty well. Maybe can you describe the difference between then and now? And Dr. Collins, if you could follow up on that a little bit, why you thought then that you could do what you did and why you had to back off and how you feel now compared to then?
Yeah, I guess it was kind of similar to the summer. As soon as I started to really push myself, and a practice is much different than a game, and I wasn't getting hit. I was skating pretty good, but we're talking about split seconds in hockey, and I think people have to realize that too. Is that you can look good on the outside. You're not limping with a concussion. It's not visible, but as far as timing and things like that, things feeling faster, that's all part of those symptoms, and a lot of those things started to creep back, and the fogginess that Mickey talked about, the headaches, that kind of thing. As soon as I started to increase exertion and intensity, all those things seemed to creep back a little bit. So it's not easy to kind of go through that. There's no guideline. You've got to listen to your body. You've got to listen to the doctors, and luckily for me, I've got a great team of people here that have really helped me. But at the same time, at the end of the day, I know how I feel, and I've got to make sure that I let them know that.
And to answer your question, Sid's been, he's been an incredible patient. He's compliant with everything. He's worked so hard to get better from this. The amount of time he's done with rehabilitation, the amount of hours we spent together, the amount of phone calls we made. I couldn't have a better patient with this, and that's going to help with this outcome because, I think we have a very good dialogue between us. And yeah, I mean, he went back, and when he got to 89%, the symptoms started coming back. So we backed off. It's as simple as that.
That's a question for Sidney Crosby. It's Paul Hunter from CBC National News. Despite all the positives that we're hearing here, I've yet to hear an absolute, and I recognize that that's part of the problem with these kinds of injuries. But I wonder if, given that, you're willing to say what so many people are thinking because of the stakes involved here and the importance of this kind of injury, which is that there remains a possibility that you will never play in the NHL again?
Pretty slight one. I wouldn't bet on that. But I think that, yeah, it's a scary thing, and I think it's, we've got to be aware of it. I think even for myself, I've been much more educated over the last 6-7 months here with how serious these are, and I think we continue to educate ourselves, but we can have as much education as we want. If concussions are as prominent as they are now, it doesn't matter how much you know about them, they're going to be a problem. So I think we've got to make steps to help avoid them and not deal with this. But as far as my situation, I'm lucky. I mean, I feel like I'm in pretty good shape and on the right end of this right now.
But are you preparing for that possibility in your head?
Not whatsoever. Not at all.
Sid, can you kind of, this is a two-part question, but I'm not sure that a lot of us understand what 90% of intensity or 89% intensity for you is. Is that lugging 3 people up Citadel Hill, or what do you have to do to reach that? And given that, and you said practice is different from games, so what's your status for maybe skating with the team in non-contact situations in a training camp?
Yeah, I mean, 80-90% is, and I think I've discussed it with the doctors, with Ray, with everyone. It's, and we talked about that extra gear in hockey. I mean, it's one thing to be out there skating and to be cruising around, but it's another thing to really exert yourself fully and to have to turn quick and stop and all these things that we take for granted so much doing every day, but are pretty taxing on your whole system. So I would say when I say 80-90%, when I really fatigue myself or really stress those things, I didn't really respond the right way. But and then the second part, what was the second part to your question?
Would that allow you to participation?
Well, I think as far as Dr. Collins and communication with the team, I think that's something that we'll see moving forward. I'm not sure how things are going to go, but I would expect at some point, we're going to have to introduce contact and that kind of thing. But that's something that we've always kind of worked and communicated closely to figure out what those guidelines are.
Sidney, can you describe, we talked about fogginess, can you describe in your words what it was like maybe at the worst part, and when you had the recurrence of the symptoms, what was that like mentally for you to realize that you weren't there yet? Maybe describe that process and really sort of in lay terms what your life was like, what you could and couldn't do, that sort of thing.
As far as the worst part, I would say that just probably right away. I didn't really like driving, just driving or watching TV. Even having the radio on in the car, I didn't want to listen to the radio. I tried to go to a meeting actually with our team like a month in, and just watching video was something that really felt like it was stressing my system. I had to work so hard just to concentrate on that. Those were kind of the worst parts. I had a couple bad migraines and stuff like that, stuff I hadn't really experienced before. So I guess that was the toughest part. And then when things reoccur, obviously it's frustrating because you feel like you're making progress, and that's the nature of these things. Sometimes you have a few good days and a few bad days, and it's impossible to predict those kind of things. All you can do is kind of put yourself in the right situation to heal and do the right things, but there's still no guarantee sometimes. So I know that there was always a want or a need for information on what was going on with me, and I understand that, but I'd be telling you a different story every 2 days, and it's not as easy and not quite as simple as just saying there's a date and I feel better. And it's a difficult thing to go through, and trust me, I'd love to have answers myself sometimes when I was going through that, but it's not as easy as that.
Yeah, Sid, you're familiar with the NHL landscape and how many players have struggled to come back for long periods of time. And Dr. Collins pointed out that initially, just by your symptoms, he thought it was going to be a long haul. But, knowing what you did at that point about concussions, and even after Dr. Collins told you that, were you mentally prepared for the fact it was going to take this long? And if so or if not, what was your level of frustration when you started to, continue to have symptoms?
I think it's like anything. You can always prepare yourself and, think you're ready. But, when you go through it, yeah, there's obviously times of frustration. And, these are things that seem to come so easy, things that we do every day that's not as easy as we think it is sometimes when you're going through this. So I would say, yeah, there were different points where I was definitely frustrated. And as positive as you try to be, it definitely takes a toll, and it's mentally draining as it is to go through this. So it's a roller coaster, and the only thing is when you talk to guys who've gone through this, it's nice because you can, you know that they can relate and they understand. And as much as we can sit here and talk about what it's like, it's hard to really understand unless you've gone through it. So I think that's why the importance of educating people and just making sure that you can't maybe understand what it's like, but you can prepare for it and make sure you do that part. So I think there's strides and the education's gotten better, but I think we can still do more.
Dr. Collins, I have 3 questions. One, did the fact Sid took 2 hits in quick succession make this worse? 2, what specifically are the steps from here in terms of return to play protocol? And 3, are there any way he could complete those steps by October 6th?
Regarding your first question, as I talked about, this is an extraordinarily difficult injury to assess, and the types of symptoms Sid had, although they're the most deleterious and harmful and predict the worst outcome in terms of length of recovery, they're also the hardest to articulate. Do I feel that first injury, it certainly didn't help the situation. And what I see in clinic every day is exactly what happened to Sid Crosby. You have repetitive injury without even being aware there was something going on in the first place, and there being no outward signs of being difficulties going on. This is an invisible injury a lot of times. And it's not like, it's just a very complicated, convoluted, cryptic thing to go through. But it took a perfect storm to get in the situation. The types of symptoms Sid had, the biomechanics of the hit, repetitive injury, it just took a perfect storm to get in the situation. But we're doing well. We're moving forward. Is he going to be ready by October 6th? I have no earthly idea. I mean, there's a process here that we have to go through, and I'm not putting any timelines on it. Sid's not putting it. The Penguins certainly aren't putting any time. The Penguins have been. I work with a lot of different organizations with a lot of different athletes that have concussions, and I've never seen a group of individuals more committed to making sure this is done right. And so it will be done right, and there's no timelines on it.
Well, what is the process?
The process is getting Sid reconditioned, making sure at that 80, 90, 95, 99, 100% level of conditioning that Sid doesn't have a flare-up of symptoms. It's measuring this with impact over time and making sure we're not seeing any decrements in functioning. Then it's introducing light contact and moderate contact, and then in measuring and assessing the whole way and making sure that the cows are back in the barn.
Does he have to do things for a certain amount of time?
We'll know as we go. It's a fluid process.
Sidney, Dr. Carrick just talked about headshots being an epidemic right now, and recently Hockey Canada just instituted the zero tolerance policy for all headshots in minor hockey. Can I get your thoughts on that, and do you think maybe the NHL needs to do more as we keep talking about concussions all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally in agreement with that. I think that's very important, obviously, at grassroots, and this is what kids are going to know. That's all they're going to know when they start playing hockey now. So I think as a league, as a union, I think we've all educated ourselves a lot over the last 6-7 months and really looked at this. And like I said earlier, I think we can go further. I think at the end of the day, I don't think there's a reason not to take them out. I read a stat that there was 50,000 hits in a year, and we're talking about 50 maybe, 50 headshots. And to take those out, the game's not going to change. I mean, as players, we're professionals, and the odd time maybe there's accidental contact, but for the most part, we can control what goes on out there. And for sure, it's a fast game, but we've got to be responsible too. And a guy's got to be responsible with his stick. Why shouldn't he be responsible with the rest of his body when he's going to hit someone? So, whether it's accidental or not accidental, you got to be responsible out there. And like I said, at the end of the day, it could do a lot more good than what it's going to take away from the game, or possibly take away from the game, because it's great, it's fast, and it's as physical as probably it's ever been, and it's just going to get better. But we've got to kind of adjust with things too, and I think it's an important thing to really look at.
This question's for Dr. Carrick and Dr. Collins. I don't know how familiar you are with the other concussion cases in the league, like Eric Lindros and Primo and Mark Savard and so forth. But is it very likely that those came to a bad end because they came back too soon? How familiar are you with those cases, and your opinion on their end?
I'm not very familiar. It's something that every case is individualized and different. We know that clearly an athlete who's not fully recovered has an increased risk of recidivism and worsened outcome. I mean, it's medical fact with this injury, and we're going to avoid that in this situation. We're going to do the right things. I'm not familiar enough with those cases individually to fully understand the complexities and where they were at when they went back to play.
I haven't examined either of those people, and really you can't comment on the degree of such an injury without a hands-on physical examination.
Sid, you weren't listed as injured going into the Tampa game or even the Montreal game. Did you feel an obligation to try to tough through anything initially and then realize that wasn't going to happen, or did it all really just hit you in Montreal? And do you have any emotion regarding coming back without setting a timetable on it, or any expectations or hopes, aspirations?
Well, I think as far as the injury, a lot of things were felt to come from my neck. I had pretty bad whiplash, and that's not uncommon. I mean, you get pretty sore necks sometimes when you get hit, and different things happen. But that was the thought process. And like Dr. Collins said, these are tough to gauge, and we see it so often. So that's why I think it's important to be educated about it. But yeah, I mean, I think I was feeling a little bit sore in my neck, but I didn't think anything of it. And obviously after the Tampa game, I was feeling some symptoms, and at that point I came back here and got evaluated.
Sid, I know there's no timeline, but do you think that it is more likely or more unlikely that you'll play in the upcoming season?
Likely.
It's likely you'll play.
Yes.
It's for both doctors, please. Assuming that the progress is substantial and Sid gets back to a place where he can play, will there come a point where there will be no evidence that an injury ever occurred? And in conjunction with that, will he be more susceptible to further head injury, even though he's recovered from this one?
To answer your first question, yes, there will be no evidence that this injury is there anymore, but we wouldn't put him back to play. The brain wants to recover from this. It will recover over time, and with the right therapies. It was a more significant event, but we'll get there. We're getting there. He's made tremendous progress. In the second part of your question is our research and many others in this field, and we've come a long way with research, understands that if you have full recovery, the outcomes are far less in terms of recidivism and problems reoccurring. And I expect that to occur in this case. I'm very optimistic that we'll see Sid have a very long, fruitful NHL career.
Thank you.
I'd add something to that. I think that we've got some markers now that we didn't have before on Sid Crosby and his brain function. And our goal is to make his brain function better than it has been. So hopefully he'll have a better functioning nervous system than he had before. And certainly we don't expect any sort of sequelae.
And this is just one thing from the team standpoint. From talking to the doctors and dealing with Sid all summer on this is, the 80-90% we hear about, he will not return to play until he's 100%. Here's a player that is, over my 5 years with him, has played at less than 80% with injuries, as many athletes do, but there is no 90% returning from a concussion. So just to be clear, when the team's standpoint is here, and Sid is aware of that, and all on the same page, which is, been beneficial for all of us through this whole process.
Teddy Katz in the back from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. First question for you, Sidney. What symptoms are you facing right now at this point, and where are you in terms of your workouts? And for Dr. Collins, because this is such a difficult injury to gauge, how can you guarantee that Sidney will make a recovery, a full recovery to play again, when it is such a hard thing to gauge down the road as well?
You know what, as far as symptoms go, I'm just dealing with headaches right now, a little bit of headaches, and trust me, that's a long ways from where I was in January. So, and even I can answer a bit of your question for Dr. Collins too. As far as when you see that type of progression, for me personally, I'm sure you can comment on it, but when you go through all those things and you're able to see how you've progressed and all those different symptoms and how they're starting to go away, and seems pretty good. So that's a long ways, and I can't speak for him, but I think for me personally, I've seen that.
I agree. If you knew where we were and where we are now, it's pretty evident there's tremendous progress. And it's mainly, to answer your question, is experience. I see 4,000 cases a year of this injury, and put a lot of athletes back to play and have very good outcomes from it, and I expect no different here.
Thank you. Hey, Sid. I'm Kathy Gooley from Maclean's Magazine. We've heard the thorough and even innovative treatments you've been getting from Dr. Collins and Dr. Carrick. Eric Lindros came up earlier. I spoke with him at length about the consequence of his concussion and the mental and the emotional toll that it took on him years and years after he retired. He talked very candidly about how psychotherapy was a big part of his treatment and recovery. Can you talk to us a little bit about whether that's something that you're incorporating into your recovery, and maybe describe sort of the mental or emotional toll of what you're going through?
Yeah, the whole process is basically that. It takes its toll, and at this point, like I said, it's much better. I feel a lot better, and there's no doubt that's part of it. That's part of the challenge, part of the battle. But I haven't really talked to anyone in particular, but I've been really lucky to have a good support system around me, my family, and the team, the group of doctors, my agency. Everybody has been unbelievable, and it's important when you're going through anything in life, whether it's this or anything else, to have that, and I've been lucky enough to have that. So that's a big key in anything, and getting better, and that's certainly, I think, been a big factor for me.
Ray and Sidney, given the uncertainty about going forward, from the aspect of the impact on the team, both he's your captain in addition to to being your best player. What are your options from that standpoint of anything roster-wise, what you could and couldn't consider given the uncertainty? And Sid, as the captain, how does this impact directly that role as being a leader on this team when you can't be around the team?
I think you can lead in a lot of different ways, and there's sometimes you're playing bad, but you're still expected to be a captain. So I think you can show leadership by the way you're looking at a lot of different things, whether it's being there for other guys, whether it's the way you handle yourself and handle the situation. There were days where I'd come to the rink and I didn't feel great, but I didn't want to sit there and mope around and feel sorry for myself. I had to be there and be supportive and be optimistic and positive. So that's a day-to-day thing, and that doesn't change. And it'd be easy to change that if you're playing bad or if things aren't going well, but that's part of being a captain, and I understand that responsibility. So I feel like I can still show leadership and be there for each and every one the same way as if this didn't happen.
Yeah, from the just from the team standpoint, there's no replacing Sidney Crosby, as we know. We look forward to Evgeny Malkin's healthy return, Jordan Stahl, a healthy training camp. Going back to last year with Sidney, he's the captain of our hockey team. Even after his injury, he was a go-to guy for me in terms of getting his feedback no differently than any other year in terms of the team. You know, that's a general manager-captain relationship, I think, that you have to have. You know, he's, as we know, during the stretch run in the playoffs, he helped the coaching staff and was in the press box helping out in that respect, but he's definitely a better player than coach, so we're looking forward to having him back. And as I've said before, he will be worth the wait. He won't be rushed, and but as we sit here today, we're very pleased with his progress, and we thank everybody for attending.